Hey guys, I'm Chris back and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks, and this week, is the Squier really going to become a future classic? So, as usual, I think I'm a little bit late to the party on this one. I mentioned a few weeks back that I'm in the process of putting together, or at least acquiring all the bits and pieces required to make a parts caster Jazzmaster. More on that in coming weeks. So, as a consequence, I've been spending a hell of a lot of time on eBay and Reverb, digging through various Jazzmaster related search terms, looking for various bits and bobs, and in the course of doing so, I've noticed a somewhat unusual trend that, suffice to say, piqued my interest. The signature Squier J Mascis Jazzmasters, second-hand, are fetching very similar prices too, if not, in some cases, some inexplicable cases, more than a new example will set you back. Now, this is especially impressive given that you can pretty much go into any guitar shop in the country that stocks Fender and consequently Squier and just buy one brand new straight off the wall. And such strange scenarios are usually reserved for when there is a sufficient amount of hype or buzz around a guitar, and subsequently people start to take leave of their senses for some reason. Now, to be honest, I've been playing a Squier 40th Anniversary Jazzmaster as one of my main touring guitars for the last year or so. Guitar magazines always love this kind of stuff. So honestly, I'm kind of surprised I haven't crossed paths with one of the J Mascis signature models before this point. And as such, kind of got me wondering, why is there so much hype? Why is there so much buzz around this guitar? So, decided to find out. Got hold of one, and having spent a few days with one now, thought I would pose the question. Have Squier quietly released a bona fide future classic? Well, when I say quietly, as I said, I think I'm a little bit late to the party on this one. And with eBay having piqued my interest, started doing a little bit of digging online, and honestly, I don't think I've ever seen a budget guitar generate quite so much interest, or buzz, or intrigue, or hype, especially for a guitar that's not actually that new. When Fender released the short-lived J Mascis signature Jazzmaster in 2007 in Purple Sparkle, it wouldn't be long until they followed it up with a Squier version, albeit with a basswood body finished in vintage white and an anodized pickguard. We had a Rosewood fretboard with 21 jumbo frets, and interestingly we had a tune-o-matic, or adjuster-matic as Fender call it, bridge, presumably for better intonation. Now, there is a little bit of confusion surrounding the pickups in J Mascis Squier Jazzmaster, not helped by Fender having released J Mascis signature Jazzmaster pickups earlier this year, which, unsurprisingly, are very different to what you get in the budget version. Now, there's a little bit of speculation online, although I've not really been able to find any conclusive proof that the pickups in the Squier version are actually much more akin to, if not just actually P90s. As I said, I can't really kind of verify that either way, but that seems to be the prevailing thought. Fender's own website just simply describes them as Jazzmaster pickups, so I guess you'll have to kind of do a little bit of digging and decide yourself on that one. Now, whatever the case, the original run of the Squier J Mascis Jazzmaster ran from 2011 to roughly 2019-2020. I've read conflicting dates in kind of various places, but there is worth mentioning there was one spec change in 2018 when it changed from a Rosewood fingerboard to an Indian Laurel fretboard, no doubt in light of the CITES restrictions imposed on the use of Rosewood. CITES, if you're not familiar, is the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species of Fauna and Flora, and in the guitar industry essentially keeps an eye on the use of rosewood or endangered species of wood and whether its usage is sustainable. Now, as you can imagine, there was a fair amount of pushback on the new restrictions. The argument being that when it comes to the profligate use of rosewood or various endangered species of wood, the guitar industry is the least of anyone's worries. And ultimately, in 2019, those restrictions were repealed, but not before most major guitar manufacturers like Fender had started using alternatives to rosewood, Pau-Ferro and Indian Laurel and the like, on their cheaper models. Now, in light of it being discontinued, needless to say, it wasn't long until their second-hand value started to climb, and for a period you weren't really getting much change out of about £700 for a second-hand example, kind of roughly comparable to about $900, and presumably in response to that second-hand surge in demand, it wouldn't be long until Fender would essentially reissue it earlier this year in 2023, although crucially with that second iteration of an Indian Laurel fretboard, which does go a long way to explaining why certain examples with rosewood fingerboards still fetch more than a new one. Now, I guess this is a little bit of a shame, as even though I would undoubtedly be lying if I said I can hear a difference between Indian Laurel and rosewood, I guess it is somewhat ingrained in me, pardon the pun, to prefer a darker rosewood fretboard. So when mine arrived, needless to say, with an Indian Laurel fretboard, it's worth mentioning I did give it a quick coat of Monty's Relic Wax, which really did go a hell of a long way, impressively so on this guitar actually, more impressively than other guitars I've tried it on in the past, to really darkening up the board and giving it a little bit more kind of vibe and character, I guess. So what about the guitar itself? Now, honestly, I probably would have been more surprised, or I guess more impressed by this guitar if I hadn't come to already expect such a high level of quality and consistency from my 40th anniversary Jazzmaster that I've played. And much like that guitar, the J Mascis is an absolutely superb instrument. Straight out the box, the intonation and the setup were incredibly impressive, spot on actually all over the neck, and I couldn't really find any sharp fret edges either, which for someone who plays with his thumb over quite a lot is something I will notice very quickly, as it will quickly rip the inside of my thumb to ribbons. The fit and finish was very good across the entire guitar, again spot on actually, and even though the pickups are undoubtedly quite a bit hotter than what's in my 40th anniversary model, I'm not so much a fan of that, but again that's going to be entirely subjective and down to each individual person's preference and tastes. The one thing I would mention is that the trem isn't as smooth, again, as it is on my 40th anniversary model. There's a slight clunkiness and a little bit of play in that tremolo before you actually get the effect of the vibrato being used. Again, it's worth mentioning, however, that I have experienced this on some higher-end made-in-the-USA models, as well as some vintage guitars, actually, so I think that's more likely to be an idiosyncrasy of Jazzmaster trems more than it is of this specific model, but I thought it was worth mentioning. You can kind of hear that clunkiness on the last note of this next track. As that note decays, you can kind of hear it sort of rattling around a little bit, but again, it's not too much of a major issue. So has, or will, the J Mascis Squier Jazzmaster go on to become a future classic? Now, in fairness to Squier, they do kind of have form for this, and it wouldn't be the first time that one of their guitars would go on to become massively collectible. JV series from the 80s, the Silver series to a slightly lesser extent from the 90s, and more recently those Squier Antigua Jazzmaster baritones from the 2010s, all have gone on to become massively collectible with commensurate price points. But to be honest, I think the fact that we are posing this as a question is more indicative of the consistency and the quality that we are generally getting from Squier these days, more than it is any indictment on this being a particularly good guitar. As I said, much like my 40th anniversary Jazzmaster, this really is a very, very impressive instrument, and that's not just with the usual Squier caveats of for the money, for two reasons, I guess, principally. First and foremost, a good guitar is a good guitar, and secondly, at £500, whisper it, it's not actually that cheap. When you think about what you can get for £500, especially in terms of the second-hand market, you are very much into made in Mexico territory, and in certain cases not actually a million miles away from certain made in the USA models, which, if you are hell-bent on the guitar saying Fender on the headstock as opposed to Squier, that probably is going to be worth a consideration. Now, of course, it is kind of taken as read at this point that you are going to pay a premium for a guitar with someone's name attached to it, which for myself, at least as someone who's not particularly concerned with owning a guitar with J Mascis' signature on the back, or hell-bent on this particular colourway actually, even though it is a very pretty guitar, for myself at least, I would probably save the £100 and get the 40th anniversary model, which retails at $399 as opposed to the J Mascis at $499. Pocket the extra £100 and maybe look to invest that in upgrades for the guitar, even though, as I said, my 40th anniversary is still entirely stock after a year or so. So again, I think that's testament to the quality of the guitar that it doesn't really need upgrades. But either way, in all honesty, for either of these guitars, you are not going to go far wrong, especially if you're looking for a Jazzmaster at a very fair price point that you don't have to be overly precious about. Now, the testament to that, I'm going to play you out now on my 40th anniversary model, but as ever, thank you very much for watching. I'm Chris Buck, this is Friday Fretworks. Please subscribe, hit the bell icon if you haven't already, and I shall see you next week for another episode. Cheers guys, take care, see you soon.